Home to the West Virginia State Fair, a hotel resort known across the world, and one of our state's well-traveled routes, which was once a buffalo trail. I'm Wayne Worth, and you're watching On the Road in West Virginia, our 55 counties, Greenbrier County. Long before Greenbrier County had a resort that would host 26 U.S. presidents, much of this area was a hotbed for violence as the natives were trying to preserve their cherished hunting grounds and the early white settlers were trying to expand on a new empire. The Greenbrier Valley would also be primed for early settlement as it would provide vast opportunities for agricultural development and abundant wildlife. The icing on the cake, though, would be the area's two major Indian trails, the Seneca Trail and Buffalo Trail, which for an 18th century explorer would be considered a modern-day interstate highway. Now, fighting between the natives and white settlers would be so intense that a series of forts would be built throughout the county during the mid to late 1700s. And though these forts were relatively effective in protecting the early settlers, for many of these folks who lived some distance from these forts meant getting massacred by the Shawnee led by Chief Cornstalk. Matter of fact, it got to the point where Lord Dunmore, who was the last colonial governor of Virginia, said enough was enough and started his own war on the Shawnee. That is when he ordered General Andrew Lewis to Camp Union, which is modern-day Lewisburg, in preparation of a combined assault on Shawnee villages along the Ohio River. At that point, Lewis and 1,000 Virginia militiamen would march down the Buffalo Trail, which is today U.S. Route 60, and then up the mighty Kanawha River to Point Pleasant. What ensued was the Battle of Point Pleasant, which we'll talk more about in the Mason County segment. As for the impact Lord Dunmore's war had on the Greenbrier Valley, tensions between the natives and early settlers began to settle down. However, we couldn't end Greenbrier County's colonial story without at least mentioning the heroic actions of Dick Pointer. To make a long story short, the natives still had a little fight left in them, and on the morning of May 29, 1778, they raided Fort Donnelly near present-day Lewisburg. Dick Pointer, who was a slave at the time and with the help of some dude named Philip Hammond, held off the raiding party by rolling a hogshead of water behind the fort's door and then loading a musket with anything he could find to fire through the barrel. Pointer's shot woke up the other settlers who would also join in on the fighting, which ultimately ended the surprise attack by the natives. For his bravery, the 60 settlers that he helped petitioned the Virginia Assembly for his freedom, but were turned down. Believe it or not, though, as a rebuttal to Virginia's decision, someone did purchase Dick Pointer just to immediately set him free. As fighting between the natives and the pioneers came to an end, settlement would rapidly expand in the region as the county's population would grow over 7,300 by 1820. However, by the 1860s, Greenbrier County would experience conflict once again as our country was in a full-out civil war. The once Buffalo Trail by the 1820s was the James River and Kanawha Turnpike and would bring many people to Greenbrier County, especially to the Lewisburg area. However, during the Civil War, it also brought frequent troop movements from both the Union and Confederacy, and with two opposing armies using the same turnpike, it would only be a matter of time before they both clashed. That is just what happened on the morning of May 23, 1862, as 1,600 Union soldiers under the command of Colonel George Crook were attacked by 2,200 Confederate soldiers in downtown Lewisburg. Despite being significantly outnumbered, Crook's men took an all-or-nothing approach and aggressively advanced on the Confederates' position, killing 38, wounding 66, and capturing 100 of their soldiers. However, things were a little different during the Battle of White Sulphur Springs as 1,300 Union soldiers were on their way to Lewisburg to seize the Virginia Law Library. In their path, 2,000 Confederate soldiers under the command of Colonel George Patton said "not so fast" and put a stop to every attempt the Union forces made to advance on Lewisburg. At the end of the battle was pretty much a draw as Union forces retreated after sustaining over 200 casualties, and the Confederates decided to turn back and not continue to pursue them. Aside from the American Civil War, Greenbrier County throughout the 19th and into the 20th century was rich in diversified industries from education to coal and timber to even world-class hospitality. Even prior to the Civil War, Greenbrier County was on the forefront of making education a priority in the region. Now, it all started with the Lewisburg Academy in 1812, which then changed its name to the Lewisburg Female Institute in 1875, before then changing its name again to the Lewisburg Seminary in 1911. By 1923, the name changed again to the Greenbrier College for Women. Before you guessed it, changed its name again to Greenbrier College in 1933. The college would be a junior college for women until 1972 when it officially closed. Today, this college, which has changed names more than I changed my socks in 1 week, is now called the New River Community and Technical College's Greenbrier campus. And yes, it's now co-ed. So I bet you're asking, what about the boys? Well, they had a military school which in 1890 was initially named the Greenbrier Military Academy, then became the Greenbrier Presbyterial School in 1902, then the Greenbrier Military School in 1920 before shutting its doors in 1972. Today, the old Greenbrier Military Academy is home to the West Virginia School for Osteopathic Medicine. Now, of course, the early 1900s also meant significant booms in coal production on the western side of the county as well as a boom in timber. To give some perspective on how big the timber industry was here in Greenbrier County, in Raynell, the Meadow River Lumber Company at its peak was the world's largest hardwood sawmill. With the early and rapid expansion of coal and timber in the county, the building of spur lines and branch lines of the C&O Railroad increased production in both industries. And as for world-class hospitality, you could look no further than the Greenbrier. Now, what would start as a small spring that late 18th century travelers would use to treat aches and pains would end up becoming a world-class resort with a major PGA golf tournament. Of course, the big game changer was the coming of the James River and Canal Turnpike during the 1820s, which opened the valley up to many travelers. As word spread about the Greenbrier's healing waters and the turnpike became a major artery of early travel throughout the southeastern part of the country, this stop along the turnpike became a frequent social gathering for the southern elite. Folks like John Tyler, Martin Van Buren, and Henry Clay, just to name a few, would make their way to White Sulphur Springs to visit. After the Civil War, when the C&O Railroad came to town, the Greenbrier would then become a stop during a long train ride, and a much welcome one at that. Now, it didn't take long or much critical thinking on the C&O's part to understand the financial benefits of going into the hospitality business as a railroad, and in 1910 purchased the resort as a major destination on its main line. For the next 32 years, the Greenbrier would prosper as many industrialists and movers and shakers would frequent the resort. However, in 1942, the U.S. Army purchased the resort and converted it into a 2,000-bed hospital and rehabilitation center for wounded servicemen during World War II. Now, at the end of the war, the Army sold it back to the C&O, Dorothy Draper dressed it up in 1948, and PGA legend Sam Snead returned home after serving in the war and became the resort's golf pro. Then the Cold War happened as the United States and Russia entered into a nuclear arms race. So what does the Cold War have to do with the Greenbrier? Well, in 1956, the U.S. government again utilized the hotel resort, but this time as an emergency bunker to protect Congress in the event of a nuclear strike on Washington, D.C. For the next 30 years, the bunker would be a top-secret operation and also part of the hotel. However, by 1992, a Washington Post article would expose this top-secret operation, and as a result, the U.S. government shut down its operation of the bunker. Today, the hotel gives guided tours to this man-made wonder. As for the rest of the Greenbrier, it has expanded its reach throughout the nation and the world with adding a National Football League training camp facility and a major PGA tournament golf course. The resort is indeed a perfect example of the opportunities that the hospitality industry can bring to a once small spring in the middle of nowhere. Now, we can't forget about Greenbrier County's signature industry, which is also its most celebrated one. Farming and agriculture has always been a part of Greenbrier County's history since its early pioneers. It's an industry that has not only sustained communities through tough economic times, but a way of life that has been celebrated throughout our state through its many fairs and festivals. And what started as a Greenbrier Valley Fair in 1921 became the West Virginia State Fair in 1946, which to this day attracts thousands of people every year to celebrate our strong connection to agriculture and the land and people that we cherish. I'm Wayne Worth, and until next time, always remember what we value and hold important to our lives today came from events that happened yesterday, and is when we begin to understand the events of yesterday that we fully embrace today, which makes tomorrow become less of a mystery.